Welcome back to Selling Your Business with David King. I'm David King, and today I'm happy to be joined by Patrick Ungashick. Patrick is an exit advisor. His firm is Navix, and he is located in Atlanta. Patrick, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, David. A pleasure to be with you today.
So Patrick is going to give us a broader description of the services offered by an exit advisor, a little bit about his background and advice to people looking to sell their businesses, kind of a nutshell job, a drive-by shooting of what he would offer to someone, and not the best term to use today, but services that he would provide to someone if he's working with a business owner, planning to sell their business, getting them through the process. Obviously, just skimming across the details here.
Sure. Well, when we first launched an exit planning service and firm, David, I would, no exaggeration, I would say 95% of the time when we spoke to a business owner, the most common reaction was, I didn't know you guys existed. I didn't know there was such a thing as exit advisors or an exit planning. That number's fallen, but it's still probably right around 50%. As many business owners, well, first of all, most business owners only exit one time, and many of them are unfamiliar with the resources and tools out there. So I did start in my career. I spent my first 6-7 years doing investment banking work up in the Northeast out of New York. And I observed in my career that there were a lot of great businesses owned by some pretty successful people and very hardworking people. And with very little exception, I'm sure you've seen this, David, with very little exception, they would get to what I call the 1 yard line and they would struggle. They would struggle with exiting successfully. So about 15, maybe close to 20 years ago now, we've launched a formal exit planning service to help business owners plan for and achieve successful exits.
So in general terms, what do exit advisors do for business owners?
What I think they need to do is they need to start by helping business owners define their goals. Most business owners will say things like, sure, I want to reach my financial win, whatever that number is, and I want my people to be taken care of, and I want my company to continue on in some way. And those are all great, but they're really not well defined, and you've really got to be a lot more specific in order to be able to go into the process and be prepared to achieve whatever outcomes you want to achieve. So it starts with gaining as much clarity as you can around what are your exit goals. How do you want to exit? When do you want to exit? How much do you need? What do you want to avoid happening in the process? And then from there, it's coordinating with the client and the client's other advisors, top of the list being their accountant and their lawyer, but not just those folks, but coordinating with their other advisors to implement the strategy and the tactics that's going to best achieve those goals as they get their company and themselves ready. So it's a blend, Dave. It's a blend of consulting, helping the client figure out what the client wants to achieve and the best way to get there. And then it's the other half of it, if you will, is project management, coordinating and taking on responsibility for doing the work of getting the company and the owner ready.
And so it's obviously a multidisciplinary field that you
Yes.
work in, and you probably work with a number of other business service providers, estate planning attorneys, tax attorneys, CPAs, corporate attorneys, business brokers, investment
Yes.
bankers. And you probably wear many of those hats from day to day. When you provide your services, would you say you call most upon skills associated with probably, what type of skills do you use the most?
In terms of doing our work,
Mm-hmm.
You're right. It is pretty multidisciplinary. We don't have to be experts. I mean, our job is by no means to replace any of those necessary other professions you listed, but we have to be able to know what the issues are, and we have to be able to spot the needs, and we have to be able to understand and help our client understand the importance of the accountant and the lawyer and the investment banker and business broker and those other professions you listed. So there is some technical knowledge that we need to have. But in addition to that, I would say just as important, David, is a sense of empathy. I mean, this is a difficult journey for a lot of owners. A lot of owners just hit a home run and it's a great outcome with very little stress along the way, but that's probably more the exception than the norm. The norm is that this is a pretty challenging process for most owners. They've never done it before. It's new, it's unfamiliar. They have a lot on the line. Their financial net worth is on the line. Their sense of doing right by people, by employees, by customers is on the line. And their personal peace of mind is often all wrapped up in on this. So we need, in addition to being experts in the exit planning process, to be effective, we really need to be able to be empathetic and put ourselves in the client's shoes and understand what he or she or they're going through, and not lose sight of the human issues that run through all this.
What size businesses and what size transactions are typically big enough to,
Right.
to use an exit advisor?
So our sweet spot in the market is we 80% of the clients we work with are companies that have, an adjusted EBITDA earnings of somewhere between 1 million and 10 million. I think that's most people's definition of small to mid market. If you look at revenue, you could say 5 to 100 million, again, would probably be 80 to 90% of what we touch. But there's exceptions. There's companies that are a little bit smaller and there's companies that are a little bit bigger. What tends to happen, to generalize, David, is if the company is too small, then you really got to ask yourself, is there anything there that you can exit from? Is there anything there to sell? If the company stops running, if the company stops being profitable the moment the owner walks out the door, there may not be anything there, really to exit from. On the other side, with regards to size, what we tend to see, there's exceptions, but what we tend to see is once the company gets into a couple $100 million of revenue and above, they typically will have either on the team or an outsourced relationship with a CFO who has deal experience, and or they'll have a board in place, a true independent board of directors, and one or more people on that board may also have deal experience. So as the company gets bigger, there's a pretty good chance that they've insourced some of the skills and experience that we otherwise might provide, which is why we sort of sit in that small to mid-market size range.
And when you work on a transaction, when you work with a business owner before their transaction, or a team of business owners and management, how do you attack your projects?
Start with, and you mentioned a key word there, team, which is what if there's multiple owners? Because in our research and in our client base, about 70% of companies have more than one owner. So right away, you've got to understand, and what does that mean, and who needs to be involved in the room, and who's part of the decision-making process. But as I mentioned a moment or two ago, it starts with setting goals. A lot of that is conversation. A lot of that is throwing out scenarios. Would you want to sell your business to a company that looks like this? Would you be comfortable selling your company to a buyer that looks like that? A lot of time spent with the owners collectively, if there are multiple owners. A lot of time spent with the owners individually, giving them the opportunity and the freedom and the comfort to be able to explore their individual goals, especially if those goals may or may not be in alignment with their co-owners. And then from there, it's laying out that strategy and that tactic and quarterbacking the process. I know it's cliche, I know everybody uses it, but it's just the one that fits in our situation. Quarterbacking that process to drive the implementation, because the client is busy running their company. And the last thing any owner, especially if you plan on selling your business to an outside buyer, last thing any owner can afford to have happen is have the company results soften, or even worse, slow down as they're in their last 2 to 3 year stretch. So while they're focused on running an efficient and hopefully profitable business, it's our job to work with them and the rest of their advisor teams. So once the owner says, yes, I want to do that, to get that implemented and built and ready so that we're making the progress we need to be making while the owner is focused on running a profitable business.
And if you're brought on in an ideal situation, and how long do you have between early planning with the owners, the management, and the closing of the transaction?
Great question. One that comes up a lot. The ideal is 5 years, and I'll tell you why. First of all, I don't know what it is, David, but in our experience, there's a light bulb that goes off when a business owner is looking himself or herself in the mirror and they realize they've been telling themselves for a long time, oh, I think I want to exit sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. And they've been telling themselves that for a long time. But then they look in the mirror one morning and they go, you know what? I think I'm kind of serious now. I really do want to exit. sometime maybe in the next 5 years. It seems to be that tipping point where people realize that this is something they don't want to go anywhere tomorrow, but they don't want to be here forever. So that's one part of it. It's a little bit psychological. The other part of it is 5 years may sound initially like a long period of time. 5 years is 60 months. It flies by. If a business owner is telling himself or herself that they want to exit sometime in the next 5 years, you're already in the homeward stretch. And David, as you know, if you're selling a business, buyers want to see 5 years of financials. So the results that the company is booking right now are going to be part of the conversation when you go to sell if you're within that 5-year window. Now, not every client gives us 5 years of runway. We do work with business owners who say, look, get me out of here as soon as possible, as soon as I can achieve my goals. And sometimes that's a heck of a lot quicker than 5 years. But the less time a business owner has to prepare for exit, then the less time they have to get things done. And if your time runway is a lot shorter than 5 years, there's going to be stuff that there just won't be time to get to. And you're going to have to pick and choose as to what to focus on and what to improve. And there's going to be stuff that just never gets addressed. So that 5 years is really that ideal tipping point. In reality, some clients have that long and some don't.
So based on your years of experience and all the transactions you've worked on, typical, just a hypothetical new business, you land a new client to serve.
Okay.
Day one, you start drilling down on their files, talking to them. What is the most typical issue that you find that you say, okay, we got to hold this thing up a little bit and fix this?
Yeah. So if we're talking about within the company, probably the 2 or 3 things that are most common and bubble up right to the surface right away is first is their financial reports and records. Most businesses don't have financial reports and records that are built for what a buyer is going to be looking to achieve. I mean, do you have audited returns? If you don't have audited returns, do you even have reviewed returns, reviewed financial statements? And so right away, there is a level of financial discipline that probably needs to be brought into the picture with regards to their reports and their record keeping. That's not to say that anyone is lazy or sloppy or incompetent in terms of putting together a P&L and a balance sheet, but buyers have a specific set of standards that they're going to be looking at, a specific way that they're going to acquire that company with regards to their accounting systems, level of diligence, and most privately held companies don't run to that standard. That's one issue. The other issue that probably comes up with most clients in the very beginning is how effective can this company grow and perform going forward without the owner's involvement? It's, the language, David, that we see people fall back on all the time is, well, can the company survive without me? That's not enough. It's not enough if your company can just survive without you, if you're the exiting owner. The standard is higher than that is, can the company thrive without you? Because if the company can't grow without your day-to-day hands-on involvement, that's a real limiting factor with regards to value at exit. So those would be just 2 of the issues that typically come up pretty early in any client engagement, which is this company ready for the scrutiny from a financial standpoint, the scrutiny that most buyers are going to bring into the picture. And second of all is how owner dependent is the company in its key operations, business development functions, key relationships in the marketplace.
Yeah, that totally jives with my experience, particularly the accounting. That I studied accounting undergrad, worked as a CPA for a few years before I went to law school, used it in my legal work, both on Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and representing ordinary Main Street businesses, and now also as an M&A advisor. In no other capacity, obviously when I worked as an accountant, that was what we were doing, we're auditing. But in all other transactional settings, it's never as important as it's going to be when it comes to the sale of a business.
That's right.
That nobody is going to, even with initial public offerings, all the Wall Street investment bankers are in there. When the financials are discussed, it was just kind of, wake me up when you're done sort of thing. When somebody's going to come in and write a check for a business for this type of money, they are going to scrub those numbers. A bank is going to scrub those numbers before they lend to see a business go from person A to person B. And so the value of good accounting becomes readily apparent and can either delay a deal or derail a deal altogether.
Absolutely, absolutely, and everything you said, of course. And then on top of that, it's looking at the financials through the lens of what a buyer is going to how we look at it. Here's my favorite example, and I know it's one you've undoubtedly encountered as well, which is how much cash is the business sitting on? You could put a room full of business owners together in the room and say, does your company have surplus cash sitting on the balance sheet? Now, I know right now we're dealing with a pretty difficult business environment because of the public health crisis of the virus going around. But generally speaking, most successful privately held companies, in our experience, sit on more cash than they need. And then you'll ask the business owner, how come the company is sitting on this extra X amount of money? And, oh, well, it's safer there as opposed to it being at home. And in reality, first of all, legally it's not, because if it's in the company checking account, it's subject to company creditors. So it's actually not safer in the business. Psychologically, it feels better, especially if they were a founder and they remember way back when they were not sure they can make payroll next month. So there's a peace of mind that comes with that surplus cash. But as you and I know, the buyer comes along, and if that surplus cash is sitting there, buyer is going to say, well, that cash stays with the company. That's part of the working capital. And the seller is going to say, no, that's extra. You don't need that for basic working capital. And now we've got a fight on our hands, often late in the sale process, over working capital definitions and adjustments. And that's because if the seller has never been a seller before and they've never been prepared and they never looked at issues like cash through the lens of how the buyer is going to look at things, it becomes a real problem that is absolutely avoidable if you just start planning far enough ahead.
You just identified one of the differences, and there's innumerable differences between the sale of the small mom and pop Main Street business and more of the middle market companies where working capital remains part of the business. And, in a sale of a mom and pop small business, typically there's no cash changing hands. The
Right.
cash goes with the seller and everything. A financial advisor was on my show just last week, and one of the major issues that she identified is that small business owners don't maintain enough cash. They're not conservative enough. They're flying by the seat of their pants. They don't have any room for things to go downhill. And maybe it's kind of once they go through that level of maturity and become middle market, that then they're wise enough. They've got a CFO. They know they need to keep some cash on hand.
Yeah. Yeah. I would.
Transactions. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say I would agree. There is a level of financial discipline that hopefully comes into the picture as the company gets some level of scale. But scale doesn't have to be, in this case, in the tens of millions of revenue. A lot of companies, especially with recurring revenue and a stable customer base, even if they have $2, $3, $4, $5 million of revenue, if they run a profitable business over time, we typically see too much cash build up. Too much meaning that you need your operational reserve, right? And then you got to make sure you have enough to just run an efficient machine. But if the company needs X amount to do that, and the company is sitting on a lot more than X in terms of cash on hand, what are you doing with that surplus? And if you don't have a valid need for the surplus, take it out, take it home.
And on the point I was kind of making, that the differences between the way deals are handled based on upon the size of the companies or the parties to the transactions, that I wonder how often you work with people who've maybe done a little bit of homework, developed some expectations, heard from other business owners who've sold, this is how it's going to work. These are the types of terms you should get. And then you kind of have to modify their expectations. Well, no, you're treated differently here. And it things I've found never neatly fall within one class of business sale or another. We're talking mostly about the sales of privately owned businesses.
Right.
But even within privately held businesses, there's just several different ways that they're done. And the seller, I found, you just have to kind of go with the flow. If this is the way the buyer's treating it now, we can try to move the needle a little bit, but you kind of have to go along, play nicely, and just kind of deal with their expectations and try to get a deal done.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people, will go to the industry conference or be talking to people in industry, and they'll hear about some competitor who sold for X, and they'll quickly do some math and go, oh, well, I guess that means I'm going to get this amount from my company. Well, it's rarely that linear. Rarely can you connect those dots. Size is a huge determinant in terms of multiple, and in terms of what a company can go for. And the other thing, David, to build upon exactly what you were saying, is terms is pretty darn important. And terms often are not is information that is private and doesn't make it out typically into the mainstream. And terms can be just as important as price.
So if you have time with, let's just a hypothetical again, one or two business owners, and they're early on, and you're helping them to determine when they can sell, how much they need to sell. Do you have kind of a standard method for walking them through that process? And there are other advisors that you may bring into the loop, their financial advisor, their CPAs. Can you give me just kind of an ABC example of helping people determine how much they need and
We
when they can
do.
sell?
Yeah, we put a name around that exercise. We call it the exit magic number because it's so important. Uh, money does not buy happiness, but most owners, when they exit, they want to reach financial freedom, which we define as meaning you are working because you choose to, not because you have to. I mean, if I don't reach financial freedom when I exit, why exit? Just why not go back to work tomorrow? So that exercise in our process is called the exit magic number, and it's far more detailed than most people initially expect it to be. It's really doing the financial modeling to determine, okay, this is what you need to support your lifestyle for the rest of your life. And this is when then you got to look at, okay, what's the company potentially worth? And then you got to back out from there taxes if you're planning on selling, and transactional costs if you're planning on selling. And then do those two numbers line up? Are you on pace to hit your exit magic number? And if you are, great. If you're ahead of the game, that's even better, of course, because that means you have surplus, or maybe you can sell earlier than you had planned to. If you're behind, meaning it looks like you're going to come up short, better to know that now as opposed to when a buyer is standing in your doorway looking for you to sign a letter of intent, the LOI. So yes, we do. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest ahas for a lot of business owners in that process is most business owners either don't know their number and they recognize that they don't know the number, or they do know or they think they know their number, David. Oh, my number is X. Well, where did X come from? Well, if anyone did any financial modeling to come up with their initial stab at the answer, usually, and what we see happen, David, is usually people will look at what their personal lifestyle costs, how much they spend at home in order to support the lifestyle that they enjoy. And then from there, they'll figure out the rest of the math as to the size of the nest egg, again, what we call the exit magic number. Well, there's something missing in that approach, because every business owner, to some extent, his or her lifestyle is subsidized by the company. You got the cell phone, the plan for the cell phone, the computer, the iPad, 5 to 10, anywhere from 5 to 10 meals per week, the car, the repairs for the car, the insurance for the car, the gas for the car, 1 to 2 business trips per year when we're still traveling, and that are business trips, but really they double as vacations. And then not to mention, by the way, taxes and benefits. So very often when business owners are taking a first run at this to calculate their number, very often the degree and the amount of the business subsidy is overlooked, which means, of course, that if you did the math on your own, you probably came up short, you're too light. And so a lot of times when we show up and we're calculating the exit magic number, if the business owner thought he or she knew what the number was, almost always their estimate is too light, is low, because they really failed to fully calculate the personal subsidy that they enjoy from the company.
Excellent. And that's just something that all the small business owners and mid-market business owners need to have in mind, because this is the aspirational thing from the day they found a company.
Absolutely.
And then they don't need to come up short at the end of this thing and think, oh, well, great, whoops, I'm going to be light. Stepping back a little bit here, and I wanted to get a perspective on exit advisors and among the different types of exit strategies, whether it's to sell to an independent third-party buyer, whether
Right.
it's a strategic acquisition or a financial buyer, or if they make an internal succession to management, succession to members of their own family, whether or not you get involved with any ESOP transactions, or if that's kind of a last case alternative. I assume you probably run through the gamut of alternatives with people. And is there one area where it's typically better to use an exit advisor?
We do run through the gamut, and some new clients show up being rock solid certain as to what their exit strategy is going to be, and they turn out to be correct. Others show up being rock solid certain as to know what their exit strategy is going to be, and it turns out to be not correct. And others have no idea, and we help them figure it out. David, we see the world. We see the way we see the world is that there's 4 exit strategies. You're either going to sell your company to an outside buyer. That's the first. You're going to sell your business to an inside buyer, one or more of your people. That's the second. You're going to give your business to family, typically the kids. That's the third. Or you're going to shut it down in an orderly, dignified way. Those are the 4 and only 4 exit strategies. Now, people will say, well, sell my business. What if I'm big enough to go public? That's great. That's just selling your business to an outside buyer. What about an ESOP? As you know, an employee stock ownership plan. That's just a way to sell your business to an inside buyer. In this case, your employees. So there are a lot of tactics and tools out there. They just are devices to pursue one of those 4 exit strategies. And the issue is critically important because which of those strategies you pursue is going to determine so much of what you do in your exit planning. So for example, if I'm going to plan on selling my business to an outside buyer, which is about 70% of our clients, if I'm planning on selling my business to an outside buyer, I do very different things in terms of getting that company ready for my exit versus if I'm going to give my business to the kids. Because if I'm going to sell my business to an outside buyer, I want to command the highest potential value that I can get from a buyer at sale. Versus if I'm going to give my business to the kids, I want to argue the lowest potential number that I can get away with putting on a tax return. So right away, you do very different things to the company's financial records and reports because of just looking at those 2 very different exit strategies. So we deal with clients in all 4 areas. We don't care which one our clients pursue. It doesn't matter to us. We provide the services that we provide across the 4. But a lot of clients spend more time on this issue. A lot of business owners spend more time on this issue than you might expect. I'll give you probably the most common way that they get hung up is a lot of business owners we meet with, and some of them become clients, will say, hey, look, it's really important to me. I want to sell my business to my employees. It could be one specific employee. It could be a small team. Great. And we're gonna help them pursue that. And then we sit down at some point in the process, we sit down with those employees that maybe have expressed, aspirations around ownership. Maybe they already have a small ownership interest already. And we say, great, the existing owner wants to sell the whole business to you one day as part of his or her exit strategy. Those people got to want to buy it in order for that exit strategy to go forward. And we've had many, many client examples where the business owner is so excited that are going to get these 2, 3, 4 key leaders in the room and start on a path where they're going to buy the company. And the door closes and we start talking to these 2 or 3, 4 key leaders after the owner has left the room. And once the door closed, they look at each other and they look at us and they go, we don't want to buy it. Maybe it's too expensive, too much risk. Maybe they don't want to continue to work another 20 years, which is what it would take for them to recover on the risk and the debt. So it's one thing to have an aspiration around a specific exit strategy, like selling to my people. It's another thing for that aspiration to actually be viable. So yes, one of the very most important steps in our process is getting clarity around what is the exit strategy from those 4 that we're going to pursue, and then make sure it's viable and it's feasible going forward.
And is it simple enough to say that typically you get the most money for your business if you sell to an independent third-party buyer, whether it's...
I would say typically yes. However, it really depends on the industry. As you're aware, many industries, the best buyer is working in the company. Professional services firms would be the best example of that. Sure, there are some accounting firms and engineering firms and marketing firms that sell to a competitor, a strategic buyer, and occasionally a financial buyer as well, like a private equity group. But the most common exit strategy in a professional services firm is to sell to the next generation of professionals in that firm, because that's where you're going to get the most money over time. Maybe not the most cash up front, but the most money. So I would agree with your statement absolutely. I would in addition say you really got to look at the industry, because some industries are dominated by one type of exit strategy more commonly than another.
That's a great point. Is there any one type of transaction? I'm sure they all um, have to consider taxes
Yes.
to one extent or another. But is there typically more tax planning required to avoid the enormous gain when you sell to a third party buyer? You know, try and get deferred compensation plans in place early, do what you can, do everything to defer gain on a sale versus if you've got an internal succession or,
Yeah.
transfer
Yes.
to family members.
Yes, absolutely. So when you're transferring to family members, of course, a key theme and a key need is to look at the transfer tax implications, gift or estate taxes. So that's absolutely part of the process. Having said that, though, if I was to rank the four exit strategies, where taxes are perhaps the biggest consideration and concern, it's the inside sale, because very quickly, if any of your listeners want to follow along with a pencil and paper, I'll do this very quickly. Let's imagine for a moment, David, that you and I own a business. You own a business, and I work for you, and you want to sell to me. Great. And we shake hands and we say this business is I'll use simple and quick round numbers. This business is worth $1 million, and we shake hands on that number. Wonderful. One thing you know for certain is I don't have $1 million, because if I had $1 million, I probably wouldn't be working for you anymore. So where am I going to get the $1 million? I'm going to get the $1 million from future earnings of the company, which I'm either going to use to buy you out directly, or I'm going to use to pay off the bank, one of the two. Well, whether I'm paying off the bank or whether I'm paying off you over time because you took paper, or you did owner financing, either way, the taxes are the same. So very, very quickly, buying this company from you is not deductible. So if we just shake hands on $1 million and we further shake hands and say, David, you say, Patrick, give me 100,000 a year for 10 years, plus interest, of course. But we'll just keep the example really simple. That first year, I owe you $100,000. Where am I going to get it? I'm going to get it from the earnings of the company. Well, if I do nothing else, if I do no specialized planning, that first $100,000 is going to come to me. I have to pay taxes on that money. So at a 40% tax environment, I've got to make $167,000. Again, anyone can check my math, to pay a 40 cents on the dollar tax to net the $100,000 that you're expecting me to send to you. Now I make the 167, I pay my taxes, I send that first $100,000 payment to you. You receive that $100,000. In the real world, most of the time your basis is low to nothing, which means you got to pay long-term capital gains on that 100. Let's call that 25%. Okay, fine. So the dust is all settled. We've made the first payment on me buying you out on an inside sale, and the IRS collected $67,000 on the first 100 from me, $25,000 on the second, on that same 100 from you. Put those two numbers together, and we're at $92,000 per 100,000 of value that's changed hands. That's 92 cents on the dollar collective tax burden. Now, right away, people will say, but we're opposite sides of the transaction, willing buyer, willing seller, two different tax returns. And undoubtedly that's true. But with an inside sale, the one thing that makes it fundamentally different from selling my business to an outside buyer is with an inside sale, there's only one golden goose. There's only one economic engine working in this scenario, and that's the business that you own and I want to buy. So the fact that collectively we're paying, in my example, and it's a very simple example and a very common one, collectively we're paying 92 cents on the dollar, that gets kind of painful. So yes, when selling to an inside buyer, looking at the tax and the cash flow implications is hugely important. And that's why sometimes the solution is an ESOP. And we're not pro or anti-ESOP, it's a tool on a tool shelf. But an ESOP is a pretty specialized tool, and it may or may not be the right fit. But either way, if you and I are going to have this successful exit where you sell to me, in my example, on any inside sale, we got to make sure we do the tax planning well, because that's a pretty significant burden that we're going to share together.
Wow. And by that example, the taxes always rear their ugly head, no matter which way you go, and drive the structure of a deal.
Yes.
And no matter the form of the transaction, there will be some tax planning required. And folks at home, this is why you want to reach out to Patrick 5 years in advance of your sale. So it's not an issue you want to be considering just a few months before you close, or even a year before you close. And once deals are inked, it's too late.
Yeah.
So you've got to plan early to mitigate these tax impacts.
Sure, it's no different than calling my accountant on April 10th or April 14th and saying, "Hey, we're going to do tax planning, right?" No. I mean, but if I got to do a filing by April 15th, that ship has sailed. So just like you talk to your accountant a year before the taxes are due in order to see what can you do in order to legally, safely, prudently reduce your tax bill the following year. It's the same thing with the sale of the business. Only in this case, it's not 1 year out. It's got to be 3, 4, 5 years out. That's exactly right.
And if you don't mind me asking, does your firm typically bill with a success fee or hourly services or combination? Or
A little bit different. Well, how we typically work, David, we typically work on a fixed monthly fee. It's month to month because if we're not adding value, it's understandable the client would have every ability to just walk away. But we typically work on a flat monthly fee because there's nothing wrong at all with charging hourly. But we made a philosophical decision a long time ago that we wanted our clients to never have to worry about the meter running when we're talking to them or they're talking to us. So that way by the fact that the client pays us the same amount every month, that way they know that the burden of watching the clock is and the cost of watching the clock is our risk and our burden, not theirs. And
I
then
like that. Yeah.
yeah, and then sometimes we do play the role of investment banker at the end of the process, and then it's a pretty traditional fee structure with a success fee. But go back to what we just talked about 5 minutes ago. If a client of ours, maybe they think they're going to sell to an outside buyer and then they change their mind and they sell to an inside buyer. Well, if you're selling your business to an inside buyer, there's typically no success fee. Or maybe you're going to do an ESOP. With an ESOP, there's typically no success fee. So our pricing doesn't create a situation where we have some sort of economic incentive to steer our client in any one direction over another.
Super. Well, in general terms here, if you have son or a daughter and they're coming out of MBA school and they're working with other people, they're founding a business, going to go out, and you're able now with your wisdom to share that with your own son or daughter. So it's the most valuable advice you can give, and you got to assume they're going to listen to you. What advice would you give on the front end? Something that they can keep in mind and follow throughout the time that they build the business and look to sell someday.
2 words: sustainability and scalability. Those are the two characteristics of the most successful businesses out there. No business has any guarantee of survival or any guaranteed path to success. But some businesses, some business models have a clearer ability to be sustainable and to scale. And so I would advise anybody in that scenario who's thinking about starting up their own business and being an entrepreneur. First of all, it's great. I love being an entrepreneur myself. But second of all, think about the company that you dream about or you're actually starting to build. How sustainable is it? What can you do in the way of building systems and teams and processes that will make this company grow more efficiently as it gets bigger? And then scalability. What obstacles, if any, exist to the company going from 1 million to 10 million to 100 million? And don't build something that you're gonna be bumping your head against the ceiling a lot sooner, a lot smaller than you dream about one day.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, it's June 3rd of 2020. We have recently gone through some pretty major market upheaval, this unprecedented pandemic. What types of unique issues are you seeing out there in the business community today? What's holding up deals? Obviously, there's a mountain of uncertainty everyone's having to deal with.
Yes.
What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, you're right. In the very near term, right now, there is a mountain of uncertainty, and it's slowing down deals. And that's going to last for a little while. We all have to learn how to do due diligence in the current environment. Buyers are concerned about taking on more risk than they would historically feel comfortable at this point, and that's a reality today. I think that's going to be short-lived. It's not going to go away in the next 2 weeks, but we're going to learn how to do business in the current environment and with the current public health issues that we're all surrounded with. I think what's going to happen, if you want me to make a little bit bigger prediction here, is for about pivoting off the date, here we are in June of 2020, for about the last 10 years, for the majority of the last 10 years, it's been a seller's market. Multiples have been strong. The cash has been free flowing. Buyers, strategic buyers, and private equity and financial buyers are replete with cash. I think when we get on the other side of the immediate public health crisis, I think that's going to flip. I think it's going to be very much a buyer's market. We still have 9 million baby boomers in this country, in the United States, that own a business and have not yet exited. And they're right now, those people range on the high end from 75 and the low end from 57. They're not going to want to do this forever, David. I think a lot of people, we're already hearing it. A lot of business owners are going to get on the other side of the current public health crisis and the negative business impact they might be feeling. And once businesses start to recover, a lot of business owners are going to go, get me out of here before the next recession, whatever might cause it. And I think we're going to see another 5 to 10 year period where I think buyers are going to be have greater leverage than what we saw the last 10 years. And I think what all that means, if I'm even half right, what that means is sellers better be ready, because it's going to be difficult to stand out in a pretty crowded marketplace and get the kind of multiples and get the kind of valuation that you really hope and need to get in order to achieve your financial goals. So in the near term, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of perceived risk. In the longer term, it's going to be a crowded room of business owners who say, I want to exit, and you better have a company and a story that is prepared and stands out from the crowd.
I agree with you wholeheartedly there. And people are asking me about the current climate out there for business transactions. I say the deal flow is still going, but
yes,
there's more businesses coming into the pipeline than going out of it. There's a lot more people saying, well, this might not be a bad time to walk away from the company than there are people who are willing to undertake the risk of taking on a new business. But there's a lot of transition out there. There's deals that are happening. I think
yes,
once some more certainty comes back to the lending market, deals will happen.
yes.
And I am seeing transactions closing these days. It's not impossible. It just takes a little bit of extra effort and maybe a few more days waiting on the line for when the bank
True.
can get back to you with answers.
Absolutely. I mean, strategic buyers still need to make acquisitions to fuel their growth, and they will get back in that game as we move through this. Private equity funds are not disappearing. They still have investors they need to satisfy, and results that they need to achieve, and fees they want to earn for themselves. Lenders still need to lend in order to grow their own business. So the fundamentals of the market haven't changed. It's going to be different. Yes, absolutely. As a society, we're going to be different, and that's going to make changes to how businesses exit and prepare. I think it's going to, in general, make it harder to be prepared, because I think you're going to have a finer tooth comb that buyers are going to be looking at potential sellers going forward. But the fundamentals haven't changed, and when the fundamentals come back, if I'm thinking about my own exit, I want to make sure that I'm prepared, and I want to make sure that I'm ready to go when I choose to, because it's going to be a buyer's market.
Yeah, and it's all the reason to prepare early.
Yes.
Reach out ahead of time, because you just don't know when the market's going to change like it just recently did.
That's right.
Well, Patrick, it was a pleasure having you on the show. You bring a world of wisdom, and I'd love to welcome you back again sometime.
Thanks, David. I appreciated the conversation with you, and I'd love to come back. I think what you do for your listeners and your podcast is just great. So thank you very much.
Excellent. And well, enjoy your vacation in lovely Florida.
Thanks, David.
Okay. Take care.
Bye now.
And with that, this is David King, Selling Business with David King, and we'll see you next time.